welcome to the session today, which is about action learning sets. It's based on the in-track guide to action learning sets, and I'm going to send you a link to that in the follow-up email, but it's a really useful resource. It's written specifically for small and diaspora-led organisations, and it kind of goes through all the theory and a lot more detail than I'm going to give today. So housekeeping, the usual stuff. Yeah, I've talked about recording. Obviously, you can put your hand up at any time if you want to ask a question, and Julian will keep an eye on that because I can't always see the chat. And yeah, if you keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking. Please treat others with respect. If there's any issues with abuse, please, and you want to make a safeguarding complaint, you can find information on the SSAP website on how to do that. So the agenda today, we're going to talk about action learning sets. What's the purpose? How do they work? What kind of issues might you bring? And what skills might you be looking at or looking to build? And then we'll talk a bit about, as Cymru Africa, what might be the next steps for us in starting an action learning set. So introductions, I think we've done that already. It's nice to meet you all. So in terms of the theory behind action learning sets, we're going to talk a bit about that and then how we might use them as a tool. So action learning sets are the structured sessions for small groups, and they're really looking at how to address challenging and complex issues. And it's a regular basis that you meet, and then you work together as peers to explore and resolve those issues. So the concept of action learning sets was first developed by Reg Revens in the 40s, and they've been tried and tested and found to be effective in a wide variety of contexts. They've been used particularly in the third sector, in organisations, as well as within the NHS and other institutions. And they've also been widely used in different cultural contexts. And there's research into that, which shows they've been effective in cross-cultural working. So they're a simple and powerful way for individuals to learn from each other. And it's a process which involves working on real challenges and using the knowledge and skills of a small group of people, combined with a skilled questioning. And the idea is you're producing fresh thinking and maybe reinterpreting some of the ideas that you have. So we ran an action learning set in 2022 to 23 as a pilot with 6 practitioners from the Wales Africa community. And we evaluated it at the end of that. So we had, I think we ran over 8 months for that particular action learning set. I've sent you a link to the evaluation, but it's worth a read just in terms of looking at what the comments that people, how they found the experience. But the feedback was positive, and the comments kind of focused on that opportunity to share ideas with like-minded people and learn from that experience, and that it felt like a safe space. So the idea, it's a confidential safe space, and that's an important part of the contracting for the set. And then it's non-judgmental. And that idea of presenting and processing issues with peers. And there are also comments about that it can be quite, if you're in a very small organisation, it can be quite isolating, and it felt like a really good supportive peer network to feel like you weren't so alone in what you were working on. So that's why we've incorporated it into our work now, and are offering it again going forward. So action learning applies the theory that learning is the product not just of knowledge, but also of action and questioning and reflection. So the action learning set cycle, it follows this process of you stop to reflect on the actions taken, and then you draw out the learning from the reflection. You apply the learning to your planning, and then you take the action that was planned. So you're going in a cycle of reflection and learning and planning and action, and carrying that on over a period of time. So the focus is on learning from experience and putting it into action immediately or over that next time period. So there's a really good potential for applied learning. And some of the key features in action learning sets are that people support each other, but they can also challenge each other, so being open to challenge. That there's a climate of confidentiality and openness within the group, and people seek solutions to real work issues, and they use real experiences. And the group is encouraged to be honest and open in what they're bringing. And also, I guess, being able to, to sort of be open about not knowing, and being on that path to kind of discovering. In terms of things that you might get out of being in an action learning set, so it's a space for individual reflective learning. You can take that learning back to your workplace and put that into action. As I talked about, it can be supportive and also challenging from your peers. It can be quite creative in that you're getting a kind of space to think more creatively and reflectively. So you might find different ways to work on the issue that you're bringing. It can be useful to kind of test some of the assumptions you might have about your work or the problem that you're bringing, and to think about what works. And it's really having that safe environment to explore new ways of thinking and doing. It can be personal as well as professional learning and development. Because you have to be quite open, I guess, to reflecting and developing those skills, but also thinking about how to work with others in questioning, asking good questions, open questions. And it also can give you an insight into how others might achieve different solutions, maybe to similar things that you're grappling with. So this is the Johari window, which you may be familiar with already, but action learning sets, because they involve a process of learning and reflection, the Johari window is relevant in that the process can move us into discovering and bringing into awareness some of the things that might be unknown to ourselves or to others. So you're kind of opening up some of those other areas and discovering a bit more about what the issue is and things, maybe things in the way you work as well. So in terms of how it works, this is this basic structure. You usually have around 6 people or up to 8 people. Usually the participants are facing similar challenges and they're usually working in the same field. So the sessions start with, the first session would be somebody presenting an issue and then the questioning. And then subsequent sessions, they start with an action report from people who presented before. And then a new person would present a situation they're facing. So it might be a problem, it might be an opportunity, and that can be 10 to 15 minutes. And then the other members will ask questions. So they might start with questions to clarify the situation, but they're always allowing space for the presenter to reflect and respond to that. And then the presenter's given time to identify actions that they plan to take for the next meeting, and those are usually written down. And then the facilitator would summarize the discussion and actions and review the process. And then depending on the structure of the meetings, you might have another person who presents as well. So, and the session usually closes with everyone reflecting on that process. In terms of timeframes, some sets meet for 6 months, some for a year. it depends on the needs and the contracting of the group at the beginning and what people want to, yeah, I guess it's availability as well, because that's in terms of that commitment. But it is a closed group, so it's the same people would meet every time. So it's a commitment to the group for that period of time in working together. In terms of what you might bring as a presenter, so really it's almost anything that you might want to work on in order to generate action. So it works better if the issue is quite complex and maybe there's not a clear technical answer. So sometimes it could be that thing that you're kind of stuck on, but there's not necessarily an obvious answer. There's not one right answer to the way to resolve that. So what you're looking at is, how do you move forward? Like, what are the blockages and how might you navigate those, and what's the best way forward for you and your organisation? So yeah, it can be both work related and, well, usually work issues do affect us personally as well. So it kind of brings in that, how do we work with it and how are we going to move forward with that? For the issue, for you to be able to take effective action, it needs to be something that you have a level of responsibility, because otherwise, if you're kind of trying to influence others, you might not be able to take action. Yeah, so if you have influence, you can still do that. But something that is able to be, yeah, within your sphere of influence to move forward. Yeah, and something that you can progress on within the time scale of the action learning set. So one of the issues we had with the last one, we ran it over 8 months and had monthly meetings. And the feedback that we had from that was that some of the people, you know, they were quite chunky issues that were going to take longer to be able to overcome. So they'd started to progress. But the feedback was that it would be good to run it over a longer period of time and maybe have meetings every 2 months instead of every month. In terms of the roles of the set members, so the role really is to listen. So really listen actively and attentively, and attending. So also asking questions that encourage the presenter to come up with their own solutions. So the idea, it's quite coaching related in that you're, yeah, the solution lies within the presenter. So what you're doing is trying to facilitate them to get to those answers and actions. And also to be prepared to probe and challenge the issue holders' personal interpretation. So sometimes those assumptions that people have, they may not be aware that they're making those assumptions. So it's being able to kind of reflect that back and maybe, yeah, get some challenge on those interpretations. And then giving appropriate feedback with discretion. So obviously we want it to be constructive and useful for everyone. So, and it's also that skill of asking helpful questions is really useful for all your work. So it's a good thing to practice in a group, that kind of thing of not responding straight away, but actually giving somebody the space and really listening and thinking about what would be the most useful for them in to resolve the issue. Yeah, so it's not about giving advice or giving your own agenda or trying to influence what they do, and also not judging or imposing your own values, because we all have different values. And that's part of the contracting at the beginning, is to agree those things and the kind of parameters and safe space and so on. So in terms of sort of talking from your experience, because you can, if people ask, you can sort of say, if I was in your shoes, I might do this. But the idea is you're not saying you should do this, because everyone's experience is different and the context might be completely different and it might not work for them. So the facilitator, the role of the facilitator is to set the structure. So they would contract at the beginning and really kind of hold the space that we talked about and that structure, and keep time. They might intervene if necessary. So if somebody was asking a question that was too leading or kind of maybe wasn't helpful, they might intervene and ask somebody to rephrase the question or to ask it in a different way. But really to make sure that the focus remains on learning. We have been really lucky to have an expert facilitator, who Jackie Fitzgerald. So she supported us the last action learning set, and she's very experienced. She's a leadership and management expert, and she's lecturing in that at the moment. But she's also part of the Wales Africa community. She's part of the Betsy Cooting link, but she has offered to facilitate again. But the idea is that the set can become self-facilitating. So once you're familiar with that structure and process, you can build the confidence to take it in turns to be the facilitator. And then you can keep it going. And it's also then a tool that you can use in your own organisation as well. So in terms of next steps, yeah, as I mentioned, it's a closed group. So it is a commitment to the group for the period of time. So it's really kind of thinking about if you're interested. I've got a Google form which I'll put in the chat, and I'll also put in the follow-up email. Yeah, but it's really now kind of getting a sense of who's interested and when you're available. Because of Jackie facilitating, we are a bit, yeah, we need to consider her availability, and I'm just confirming that with her as well. And I'll let you know about that. I think that's it. So I'm going to stop recording.